It's funny how life blindsides you when you least expect it. For me, the shock came on a Tuesday afternoon, during what was supposed to be a routine hospital visit. My daughter Emma, one of my twin girls, was feeling worse than usual. The doctors had been running countless tests, trying to get to the bottom of her strange, lingering illness. When they suggested a full genetic workup, I agreed, hoping it might bring us closer to an answer. Emma was born with that fiery spirit that made her a fighter from day one. As she lay on the hospital bed, tubes and wires attached, her eyes locked on mine, as if to say, "Don't worry, Dad. I'm not giving up." I held her hand, smiled, and told her everything would be fine. But deep down, I had a gnawing feeling that something was terribly wrong. Little did I know how much my world was about to change. Later that day, I got a call from Dr. Stein, the lead geneticist on Emma's case. I could tell from his voice that something was off. "Mr. Callahan, we need you to come in. There are inconsistencies in Emma's DNA that we'd like to discuss with you in person," he said, his words laced with hesitation. I felt a chill run down my spine. Inconsistencies? What did that even mean? I showed up at the hospital later that night, expecting a medical explanation. Instead, I found myself sitting across from Dr. Stein as he hesitated, shuffling papers and avoiding eye contact. "Mr. Callahan, before we go any further, I need you to understand that this is highly unusual," he began. I urged him to get to the point, my patience already stretched thin. Finally, he leaned forward and looked me straight in the eyes. "According to the genetic tests, Emma and her twin sister, Ivy, do not share your DNA. You are not their biological father." I felt the air leave the room. Every muscle in my body tensed as the words sank in. "What are you saying?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely a whisper. I couldn't process it. I had been their father since the moment they took their first breaths. The idea that they weren't mine was unthinkable. Dr. Stein, visibly uncomfortable, continued. "The genetic markers point toward a close relative as the biological father. Specifically, the markers indicate that your brother, Grant Callahan, is the father of Emma and Ivy." My vision blurred, and I clenched the edge of the chair to steady myself. Grant and I had always had a complicated relationship, though I never thought it would come to this. He was the golden boy, the one our parents adored, while I was the black sheep, the rebel who dared to carve his own path. But to think that he had crossed such a line. My mind raced, memories flashing back of his close friendship with my ex-wife, Laura. I'd always thought it was strange how they stayed in touch even after our divorce, but I never questioned it. Now, I realized that I should have. I stormed out of the hospital, the betrayal burning through me like wildfire. As I drove home, scenes from the past flooded my mind, memories twisted by this new truth. Every shared smile between Laura and Grant, every late night that she'd come home claiming she'd been with friends. All of it took on a sinister new meaning. How could she betray me like this? How could they both? As I pulled into my driveway, I realized the depth of what had been stolen from me. Years. Years of fatherhood, of being there for Emma and Ivy, of believing I was their father. The life I'd built around them, the memories, it all felt like a cruel joke. But as painful as it was, a flicker of anger began to build into something stronger. I wasn't about to let them get away with this. The next morning, I confronted Laura. I waited for her outside her office, my fists clenched as she approached, clearly startled to see me. "Jake," she said, her face paling. I could tell she sensed something was wrong. "We need to talk," I growled, barely containing the fury that threatened to boil over. I led her to a quiet corner, away from prying eyes. "The DNA test," I began, each word dripping with contempt. "It came back. I know about you and Grant." The color drained from her face as the realization set in. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes, and it gave me a strange sense of satisfaction. She knew there was no way out of this. You kept this from me for years, I continued, my voice barely more than a whisper. All those nights, all those lies. You and Grant robbed me of my daughters. I was their father in every way that mattered, and you took that from me. Laura stammered, trying to find the words, but there was nothing she could say to make it right. It wasn't supposed to happen this way, Jake. You have to understand, it was a mistake. A mistake? I scoffed. A mistake is forgetting someone's birthday. This was a calculated betrayal. I took a step back, feeling a wave of revulsion. From now on, I'm done being the fool. I'm taking this to court. I will fight for the girls, and I will make sure that everyone knows what you and Grant did. As I left, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was as if confronting her had given me a new sense of purpose. But I knew the hardest part was yet to come. Reconnecting with Emma and Ivy would be a challenge, especially given the lies they had been told. But I wasn't about to back down. Not this time. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings, paperwork, and preparations. I found a lawyer who specialized in family law, a fiery woman named Lisa Thornton. She took one look at my case and agreed to take it on with a fierce determination that matched my own. "We'll get your daughters back," she assured me, her eyes blazing. "And we'll make sure everyone responsible pays for what they did." As we worked together, I began to piece together just how deep this betrayal ran. It wasn't just Laura and Grant. My own parents had been in on it, too, covering up the affair to protect Grant's reputation. They'd gone as far as manipulating the family's connections in the poker world to blacklist me, ensuring that I'd be financially dependent on them. This was no longer just about reclaiming my daughters. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my place in the family. And as I prepared for the fight of a lifetime, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. They thought they could erase me, but they were wrong. The days after my confrontation with Laura felt like an out-of-body experience. I was fueled by a mix of rage and resolve, but beneath it all was a pain so deep it nearly brought me to my knees. I'd been their father for over 2 decades, Emma and Ivy were my whole world. And yet, as the truth settled in, I realized just how much had been taken from me. But if my family thought they could erase me, they were wrong. My lawyer, Lisa Thornton, was relentless. She was a seasoned fighter, a family law attorney with a razor-sharp mind and a reputation for tearing through cases others wouldn't touch. I remember sitting across from her in her cluttered office, the smell of stale coffee mixing with the faint scent of old paper. Her desk was a mess of case files, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days, yet her eyes were sharp and focused. "Jake," she said, leaning forward with a determined look, "you're facing a mountain, but I've taken down mountains before. Your ex-wife, her father, your brother, they all had a hand in orchestrating this. And from what you've told me, it sounds like your family pulled strings in the poker circuit to bury your career." I clenched my fists. They did. I used to be part of a high-stakes poker fund, one of the biggest. I could have gone all the way, but suddenly, doors started slamming shut. Opportunities vanished. I thought it was bad luck. Lisa nodded, her face hardening. "It wasn't luck. They used their influence to blacklist you. It was deliberate, and we'll prove it. But first, let's focus on your daughters." She slid a legal document across the desk, a formal request to open a custody case. I hadn't seen Emma and Ivy in years, but I'd been keeping tabs on them through mutual friends and social media. They were now young adults, each building their own lives, but they had no idea of the betrayal surrounding their childhoods. I felt a pang of guilt, knowing the upheaval this would cause, but it was necessary. They deserved to know the truth. Lisa made her way around her desk, taking her usual seat with a sigh as she adjusted her glasses. "We'll need to present you as a victim of deception, of conspiracy. They manipulated you, cut you off from your own family. And will show that you have every right to reclaim your place in your daughters' lives. I nodded, feeling a surge of hope. When do we start? Her eyes glinted with a fierce determination. Right now. As the lawsuit was filed and the legal machine whirred into motion, I knew I had to get ahead of the story. My family would find out soon enough, and I wasn't about to let them get their story out first. I reached out to my daughters, knowing it was long overdue, but terrified of how they would react. I'd already missed too much of their lives, and now, to drop this bombshell on them. I composed a message to Emma and Ivy that night, agonizing over every word. Emma, Ivy. I know this may seem sudden, and it's been too long. But something has come to light that I think you both need to know. I've missed you both every day since our last time together. There are things you don't know about our family, and it's time for you to hear them, from me. Can we meet? Please. The message went out, and with it, a mix of dread and anticipation settled over me. Would they reply? Or had they been fed so many lies that they'd brush me off as the father who disappeared when they were young? To my surprise, the reply came quickly. Emma, my fierce, no-nonsense daughter, responded first. We can meet. But I'm not making any promises. I smiled, recognizing the same fire that I'd loved in her as a child. Ivy's message followed soon after, much softer, more hesitant. I'm not sure what this is all about, but I'll hear you out. The plan was set. We'd meet the next day, at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town, far from any prying eyes or ears. The next afternoon, I sat in a small booth at the cafe, nursing a cup of black coffee. My hands shook as I thought of what I'd say to them, how I'd break this news. The door chimed, and I looked up to see Emma and Ivy walk in. They were taller than I remembered, more mature, their faces a blend of my features and Laura's. They spotted me and made their way over, both wearing wary expressions. Dad, Emma greeted me with a stiff nod, her voice edged with suspicion. Ivy stayed silent, her eyes darting from Emma to me. Thank you for coming, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I gestured to the seats across from me. They sat down, and for a moment, we just looked at each other, a million unsaid things hanging in the air. So. Emma broke the silence, crossing her arms. What is this all about? I took a deep breath. I'm not sure how much you know about our family's history. But there's something I need to tell you about your mother and about Grant. At the mention of my brother's name, I saw something flicker in Emma's eyes. Did she know? Had she guessed? Ivy looked at me, wide-eyed, her mouth slightly open in confusion. Your mom and I hesitated, wondering how to phrase it without sounding like a bitter ex. We had our problems, sure. But there's more to it than just a messy divorce. I recently discovered something that shattered everything I thought I knew. I paused, looking them each in the eyes. According to DNA tests, I'm not your biological father. The words hung in the air, a bombshell that seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the room. Ivy's hand went to her mouth, her eyes welling with tears, while Emma's face twisted in anger and shock. You're not. Ivy's voice was barely a whisper. No, I replied, trying to keep my composure. And the truth is, my brother, Grant, is. Your mom and Grant, they had an affair. They hid it from me for years, and I never suspected a thing. I only found out because of a test we did for Emma's health. Emma's fists clenched on the table. And you think we're just supposed to believe you? After all these years? Her voice was low, but the anger was evident. I know it's hard to accept, I replied, my voice steady but filled with urgency. But you can test the DNA yourself. I'm not here to cause pain, I'm here because I want you both to know the truth. I've been kept away from you, lied to, manipulated. And all this time, I thought I was protecting you both by keeping my distance. Emma looked at Ivy, who was clearly overwhelmed. If this is true, then why bring it up now? Why drag all of this up after we're grown? Because you deserve to know what happened. And because I deserve a chance to be your father, your real father. The word settled, each of us lost in the magnitude of what this meant. There was no immediate forgiveness, no easy resolution, but at least the truth was finally out in the open. The fight had begun, and I knew it was only going to get uglier from here. As they stood to leave, I couldn't help but feel a pang of fear. Would they come back? Would they want to know more? Or would they choose the safe comfort of lies over the chaos of truth? Only time would tell, but I was prepared to give them every reason to choose me. I sat alone in the cafe, watching Emma and Ivy disappear through the door. Their expressions haunted me, the disbelief, the hurt, the anger. I'd spent years imagining what it would be like to reconnect with them, but I never pictured this, a revelation that would tear apart their world. But as painful as it was, I knew it was necessary. If I didn't fight for my place in their lives now, they'd only drift further away, fed more lies by my brother, their mother, and my powerful family. When I got back to my apartment that evening, I paced around the living room, restless. I felt like a caged animal. Every inch of me was itching to act, to confront Grant, to drag my family into the light and make them pay for what they'd done. But Lisa had warned me against direct confrontations. She was building a case, and any impulsive move could damage our position in court. Still, the need for justice gnawed at me. Hours passed, and just as I was about to pour myself a stiff drink, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Ivy. "Dad. I think I need to talk to you. Just you." I breathed a sigh of relief. Ivy had always been the more gentle of the two, with a quiet, reflective nature that reminded me of myself. She was seeking clarity, wanting answers, and I was determined to give them to her. The next morning, Ivy and I met in a nearby park. The air was crisp, the early autumn leaves a mix of red and gold. Ivy's posture was tense as she approached, her arms crossed defensively. I could see the wariness in her eyes but also a hint of vulnerability. "Thank you for coming, Ivy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked at me for a long moment before replying. "I don't know what to believe, Dad. Everything you said, it's like something out of a nightmare. You've been out of my life for so long, and now you're telling me that everything I thought I knew was a lie." I swallowed, nodding slowly. "I know it's hard to believe. I can't imagine how this must feel for you. But Ivy, the DNA results are real. I wouldn't put you through this unless I knew it was the truth." She looked away, struggling to hold back tears. "Why now, though? Why did you wait so long to tell us?" My heart twisted at her question. "I didn't know, Ivy. I only found out recently because of your health scare. And when I did, it felt like my world fell apart." I paused, gathering my thoughts. "I thought I'd lost you both because of my own mistakes, that I'd failed as a father. But then I realized it was all orchestrated. Grant and your mother, they worked together to erase me from your lives." Ivy's eyes widened, and I saw a spark of recognition there, a glimmer of understanding. She was beginning to see the truth, to piece together the inconsistencies in her own memories. "And Grandpa? Was he involved too?" she asked, her voice trembling. I took a deep breath, anger simmering beneath my calm exterior. "Yes. Your grandfather had connections in the poker world, and he used them to blacklist me. I was forced out, with no chance to defend myself. They took away my career, my future, my daughters. They took everything." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of the revelations settling over us like a storm cloud. Ivy stared at the ground, lost in thought, while I waited, hoping she'd see that I was telling the truth. Finally, she looked up at me, her eyes fierce. "If this is all true, then you have to fight, Dad. You can't let them get away with it." Her words were all the encouragement I needed. I reached out, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I will. And I'm glad you're here with me. I've missed so much of your life, Ivy, but if you'll let me, I want to make things right. She nodded slowly, still processing everything. But there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes, a flicker of trust. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. Later that evening, I received a call from Emma. My heart skipped a beat as I answered, bracing myself for the anger I knew she'd bring. "Dad," she said, her voice cold and accusatory. "You and Ivy may be playing nice, but I'm not convinced. You're telling us that our entire lives are a lie, and you expect us to just believe it?" I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "Emma, I don't expect you to take this lightly. But I'm telling you the truth. This isn't about hurting you or Ivy. It's about reclaiming what was stolen from us." She scoffed. "What was stolen from you, Dad? You disappeared. You weren't there for us." My chest tightened at her words, the guilt and pain resurfacing. "I know I wasn't there, Emma, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. But it wasn't my choice. I was pushed out, kept away from you both. I was led to believe that you didn't want me around." She was silent for a moment, and I could feel her hesitation, the internal struggle as she processed my words. "So, what happens now?" she finally asked, her tone guarded. "I'm going to court, Emma," I replied. "I'm suing your mother, your grandfather, and Grant. They orchestrated all of this, and they need to be held accountable." Her response was hesitant, almost vulnerable. "Will this change anything?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But it's a start. And I want you both to know that I'm here now, no matter what. I'm not walking away this time." Emma didn't respond, but the call didn't end either. For a few moments, there was only silence, a tenuous connection that, despite everything, still existed between us. Finally, she spoke again, her voice softer. "Okay. Just, don't expect me to forgive you overnight." I smiled, a glimmer of hope sparking within me. "I don't. I just want a chance to be in your lives again." When the call ended, I felt a sense of relief mixed with determination. My daughters knew the truth, and though their responses were mixed, they hadn't turned away. The lawsuit was in motion, and the fight for justice had officially begun. In the following weeks, Lisa gathered evidence tirelessly, digging into my family's connections and documenting every instance of manipulation and deception. She subpoenaed records, called in experts, and prepared a case that would lay bare every sordid detail. I braced myself for the inevitable backlash. My father, Richard, a ruthless businessman who had cultivated power like it was his birthright, would stop at nothing to protect his legacy. He'd already tried to contact me, likely hoping to dissuade me from pursuing this in court, but I ignored his calls. This time, I was standing my ground. The day of the first court hearing arrived, and I felt a mixture of anxiety and excitement. As I entered the courthouse, I saw Laura, Grant, and my father seated with their attorneys. They looked as polished and composed as ever, but I knew their calm was a facade. They weren't used to being challenged, and I intended to shatter that illusion. When I took the stand, I spoke with honesty and conviction, recounting the years of manipulation, the deceit, and the calculated steps they'd taken to erase me from my daughters' lives. The courtroom was silent, every word echoing in the stillness. I looked over at Emma and Ivy, who sat together, watching with intense expressions. They were hearing parts of the story for the first time, and I could see the shock and anger on their faces as the truth unfolded. As the proceedings continued, my family's carefully constructed empire began to crumble under the weight of their lies. The courtroom was filled with tension as the first day of proceedings continued. The judge, an austere woman with sharp features and a no-nonsense attitude, watched the scene with keen interest. My attorney, Lisa, had meticulously prepared every piece of evidence, every document, and every witness that could lay bare the years of betrayal and deceit. As I sat on the witness stand, recounting the last 2 decades of my life, the reality of how much had been stolen from me grew heavier. I remembered each sleepless night, each moment of doubt, each year of believing I'd failed as a father. But now, the truth was coming to light. And not just for me, but for my daughters, Emma and Ivy, who sat in the audience, visibly shaken. My father, Richard, glared at me with barely contained rage, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the arm of his chair. It was a tic he'd had since I was young, something he did only when he was losing control. My brother, Grant, sat beside him, his gaze fixed straight ahead. He wore a look of cold detachment, but I knew him too well to mistake it for composure. Beneath that mask, he was seething. Laura, my ex-wife, looked away each time I caught her eye, but she seemed less shaken than I expected. After years of deceit, she was accustomed to hiding her guilt. Her attorney whispered in her ear, but she dismissed him, her face set in an expression of defiance. For her, this was a last stand. Lisa stepped forward and called her first witness, Sarah, a former assistant of Richard's. She was a quiet, unassuming woman in her 40s, with kind eyes that contrasted with the cruelty of the story she was about to tell. "Ms. Green," Lisa began, "how long did you work for Richard Thompson?" Sarah cleared her throat, glancing at Richard with apprehension. 17 years. "And during that time, did you witness any actions taken by Mr. Thompson or his family that might suggest a deliberate effort to remove Jake from his daughters' lives?" Sarah took a deep breath, her gaze turning steely. "Yes. I saw many things." Richard's lawyer shot up, objecting on the grounds of relevance, but the judge waved him down. "Continue," Lisa urged. "Mr. Thompson often spoke about how he didn't approve of Jake's lifestyle, especially his career in poker," Sarah continued. "When Jake was blacklisted, Mr. Thompson was involved. He used his connections to influence several top poker circles, ensuring Jake wouldn't get any high-paying opportunities." A murmur rippled through the courtroom, and I saw the shock on Emma and Ivy's faces. This was new to them, they had never known the extent of my family's interference. "And what about his daughters?" Lisa asked, leaning closer. "Did you witness any attempts by Mr. Thompson to influence Jake's relationship with his children?" Sarah's face grew somber. "I did. When Jake and Laura divorced, Mr. Thompson encouraged Laura to file for sole custody. He advised her to use Jake's career against him, to paint him as unreliable. I overheard conversations where Mr. Thompson assured her that he'd provide legal support and help her cut Jake out." Grant shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and Laura's face paled slightly. Emma's hands clenched in her lap, her knuckles turning white. Ivy sat beside her, staring down at her feet, absorbing each revelation like a blow. I could feel their pain, the confusion and anger swirling within them. They had spent years thinking of me as the absent, unreliable father, and now, in a single day, their world was being turned upside down. After Sarah, other witnesses took the stand, each corroborating a piece of the puzzle. Former friends, ex-colleagues, people who had witnessed my family's calculated moves to sever my ties with Emma and Ivy. Each testimony was a piece of a devastating puzzle that was finally coming together. During a break, I caught a glimpse of Emma and Ivy as they stepped out into the hallway. They were deep in conversation, their expressions a mix of shock and hurt. I approached cautiously, unsure if they would even want to speak to me, but Emma looked up, meeting my gaze. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling. "Why didn't you fight harder?" The question cut deep. "Emma, I tried," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "But your grandfather, my own family, they used every tool they had to push me out. By the time I realized the extent of it, it was too late. I was broke, blacklisted, and fighting a losing battle. I didn't want you to see me like that, to think of me as a failure." Emma bit her lip, her gaze softening. Ivy stepped closer, her hand reaching for mine. "We didn't know. We never knew. My heart broke for them, for the years we had lost. But now, at least, they were beginning to see the truth." Back in the courtroom, it was Grant's turn on the stand. He'd been called as a witness for the defense, but Lisa had a strategy up her sleeve. She intended to expose Grant's involvement in the deception, not just his complicity but his active role in my removal. As he took the stand, he kept his expression neutral, but his eyes flickered with nervousness. Lisa didn't waste time getting to the heart of the matter. "Mr. Grant Thompson, is it true that you had an affair with your brother's wife?" The courtroom erupted in gasps, and I felt the weight of the question settle like a stone in my chest. Grant didn't respond immediately, his gaze shifting to our father, who sat stone-faced beside Laura. I had a relationship with Laura, yes, Grant finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Relationship?" Lisa shot back. "Let's be clear. You fathered Jake's daughters. You deceived him, betrayed him, and then helped orchestrate his removal from their lives. Isn't that right?" Grant's face twisted with rage, but he didn't deny it. His silence was answer enough. "Why did you do it, Mr. Thompson?" Lisa pressed. "Why go to such lengths to destroy your own brother?" Grant clenched his fists, his voice filled with bitterness. "Because Jake was always the golden child, the star. He could do no wrong in my father's eyes. I was tired of being in his shadow, tired of being second best. Laura, she saw me, noticed me. We didn't plan for things to happen this way, but once it started, there was no going back." My blood boiled as I listened to his confession. Years of manipulation, betrayal, and deceit, all because of petty jealousy and greed. And in the process, they had stolen my daughters, my life. The judge called for a recess, and as we filed out of the courtroom, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The truth was finally out. Emma and Ivy knew the depth of Grant's betrayal, and the world could see my family for what they truly were. Outside the courtroom, Emma and Ivy approached me again, their expressions a mixture of anger and sadness. Ivy spoke first, her voice trembling. "Dad, we're sorry. We're so sorry." I hugged them both, the years of distance melting away in an instant. We were far from healed, far from mending all the wounds, but we had a chance now, a chance to rebuild, to be a family. But I knew this was just the beginning. My father and Grant wouldn't let this go without a fight. The battle for justice was far from over, and I would need every ounce of strength to see it through. As I held my daughters, I made a silent vow, I would not stop until every last one of them paid for what they had done, no matter the cost. This was my fight, my family, and I was finally taking back what was mine. After the explosive revelations in court, the stakes had never been higher. The truth was out, but the fight was far from over. My father, Richard, and my brother, Grant, were cornered, and I knew they'd stop at nothing to protect their reputation and hold on to the power they'd so carefully built. I braced myself for the counterattack, feeling the familiar rush of strategy and risk that once drove me to excel at poker. Only this time, the stakes were much higher. The courthouse was filled with hushed whispers as we returned after recess, the air thick with anticipation. Emma and Ivy walked beside me, their faces a mixture of defiance and lingering hurt. I could tell they were still processing everything, still reeling from the reality that their beloved uncle and grandfather had been orchestrating this grand deception. The next witness was a private investigator Lisa had hired. He'd spent weeks combing through years of family records, phone logs, and financial transactions. His findings were the linchpin of our case, and as he took the stand, the courtroom went silent. "Mr. Daniels," Lisa began, her voice clear and strong, "can you tell us what you discovered about the financial activities of Richard and Grant Thompson?" Daniels, a grizzled man in his 50s with a calm, steady gaze, nodded. Over the years, Richard and Grant Thompson made numerous payments to various individuals tied to poker organizations, legal officials, and even child psychologists. These payments were documented as consulting fees, but my research showed they were used to manipulate Jake's custody case and blacklist him from high-stakes poker tournaments. The judge leaned forward, intrigued. "And these payments, how often were they made?" Consistently, Daniels replied, producing a thick stack of records. From the time of the custody battle to the present day. They didn't stop even after Jake was removed from his daughter's lives. The crowd murmured, and I saw Emma and Ivy's expressions harden. Each piece of evidence added weight to the betrayal, fueling their anger and disappointment in the family they once trusted blindly. Grant's lawyer rose, his tone sharp. "Objection, Your Honor. This is all circumstantial. Payments alone don't prove intent." Lisa countered smoothly. "We have documented evidence that shows Grant and Richard repeatedly lied to officials, misrepresented Jake's character, and even falsified testimonies during the custody hearing. Intent is clear, and the evidence speaks for itself." The judge allowed the testimony to continue, and as Daniels laid out the details of my family's orchestrated attack, I could feel the weight of their deceit lifting off me. Years of pain, of being shut out and silenced, were unraveling right here in this courtroom. That night, after a grueling day in court, Emma and Ivy came over to my place. We'd talked every day since the case began, but this was the first time they'd come to my apartment. I watched them take in the humble space, so different from the luxury they were accustomed to. There were no grand staircases or imported furniture here, just simple, functional pieces I'd chosen myself. For years, this place had been my refuge, my reminder of the life I was forced to build from scratch. Emma broke the silence first, her voice quiet. "It's cozy." I laughed, trying to ease the tension. "That's a nice way of saying small." Ivy smiled, but it quickly faded as she looked around, her eyes landing on a photo of us from years ago, the only photo I had from when they were children, taken before the custody battle stole them from me. She picked it up, studying the worn edges, and I saw the glint of tears in her eyes. "I can't believe we missed all these years with you," she whispered. "It's like a part of our lives was stolen." My heart broke for them, for the years of memories we'd lost, the birthdays, the holidays, the simple moments of just being together. But I kept my voice steady, determined to reassure them. "We can't change the past, Ivy. But we have a chance now to make up for it." Emma nodded, setting the photo back down. "We want that, Dad. But, we're still processing everything. We trusted Grandpa and Uncle Grant. They were family. And they'll still be family," I said, though the words tasted bitter. "But sometimes, family isn't who we expect. Sometimes, it's the people who stand by you when everyone else turns their back." They both nodded, understanding dawning in their eyes. This was new ground for all of us, and I knew it wouldn't be easy. But we had a chance now, a chance to rebuild, and I'd fight with everything I had to make it happen. In the days that followed, the courtroom battles grew fiercer. Richard and Grant's legal team fought ruthlessly, trying to discredit me at every turn. They dug into my past, bringing up old gambling debts, even trying to frame me as an unfit father. But Lisa was relentless, countering every accusation with facts and witnesses who could testify to my commitment, my love for Emma and Ivy. One of those witnesses was an old friend, Marcus, who had seen me through the worst of it all. He took the stand with a quiet confidence, and as he spoke, I could see Emma and Ivy watching him with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. "Jake has always been a good man," Marcus said, his gaze unwavering. "He may have been a gambler, but he was never reckless. He played smart, and he always put his daughters first. When he was blacklisted, he was devastated, not because he lost his career, but because he lost his way to provide for them." I watched Emma and Ivy's expressions soften, the walls they built slowly crumbling as they heard the truth about my life. The trial dragged on, each day a new battle in a war that had been waged in secret for years. But piece by piece, the story was coming together, and I could feel the tides turning in my favor. Then, one afternoon, Richard took the stand. His face was hard, his gaze as cold as steel. He wasn't used to being challenged, to having his authority questioned, and he made no attempt to hide his disdain. "Mr. Thompson," Lisa began, her voice measured and respectful, is it true that you've always disapproved of Jake's career? Richard's jaw tightened. Yes. Poker is a dangerous, unstable career. I didn't want my granddaughters exposed to that lifestyle. And is that why you orchestrated his removal from their lives? Lisa pressed. Richard's face twisted in anger. I did what was necessary to protect my family. My heart pounded as his words hung in the air. His admission was subtle, but it was there, a confirmation that he'd acted out of his own twisted sense of protection, that he believed his actions were justified. So you admit, Lisa continued, seizing the moment, that you used your influence, your wealth, to manipulate the custody case, to blackball Jake from the poker community, and to ensure he couldn't provide for his daughters. Richard's face reddened, and for a moment, I thought he might deny it. But then, with a cold, calculated look, he spoke. I did what I had to do. Jake was a threat to my granddaughters, and I wasn't going to stand by and watch him ruin their lives. The courtroom erupted, and I felt a surge of anger so intense it nearly blinded me. Years of pain, of betrayal, of being cast aside, all because of my father's ruthless ambition, his belief that he knew what was best for my children. The judge called for order, but the damage was done. Richard's confession was all we needed to cement our case, to show the lengths he'd gone to tear me from my daughters' lives. That night, as I sat alone in my apartment, I felt a strange sense of peace. The battle was far from over, and I knew my family would fight tooth and nail to protect their reputation. But the truth was out, and Emma and Ivy were by my side. For the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope, a chance to rebuild the life that had been stolen from me, to finally be the father I'd always wanted to be. And no matter what it took, I would see this fight through to the end. The courtroom battles had taken a toll on all of us. Every new revelation felt like salt in an open wound, but the fight had made one thing clear: my daughters were finally seeing through the facade. For years, I'd been the villain in their eyes, painted as reckless and irresponsible. But as the truth surfaced, so did their understanding, and with it, a hesitant, budding trust. Our late-night conversations grew deeper, peeling back the layers of manipulation that had kept us apart. Emma and Ivy asked questions, about my past, about the years I spent fighting an invisible war against the family I once trusted. They wanted to know me, the real me, and I could see their walls crumbling with each story I shared. One night, Ivy called me out of the blue. "Can we come over?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Of course," I replied, surprised but hopeful. Within an hour, they were at my door. They'd brought a stack of old photo albums, relics from a past life I thought had been buried. The pictures showed a family united, birthdays, holidays, ordinary moments frozen in time. But behind each photo lay the knowledge of betrayal. Emma pulled out a faded picture of me holding her as a baby. "You loved us, didn't you? Even when everyone said you didn't care, you still fought for us." I nodded, my voice thick. "I did. I always have." For hours, we pored over the photos, piecing together fragments of a life stolen by lies. They began to understand the depth of my love, a love that had been kept from them for so long. But with that understanding came anger, anger at Richard, at Grant, and at the twisted legacy that had robbed us of so many years. In court, the battle escalated. Lisa had been relentless, using every tool at her disposal to bring down the ironclad defense Richard and Grant's legal team had crafted. Each day brought a new revelation, a fresh wound. Richard had kept meticulous records of his actions, never expecting them to be used against him. The judge was visibly disturbed as the details unfolded, and I could see Richard's stoic mask begin to crack. The man who once commanded absolute authority now looked like a desperate figure grasping at the last remnants of control. Grant, on the other hand, was unraveling. His reputation, built on lies and manipulation, was crumbling around him. I'd caught him shooting me venomous glares, as if I were the one to blame for his downfall. But I could feel his fear. It was only a matter of time before he lost everything. When Lisa called Grant to the stand, he sneered as he took his seat, his arrogance still intact. But Lisa's questioning left him cornered. "Mr. Thompson," she began, her tone unyielding, "can you explain why you've spent years making sure Jake was kept out of his daughter's lives?" Grant scoffed, trying to appear unfazed. "Jake was unfit. My father and I were simply protecting the girls." Lisa's gaze was icy. "And yet you've never offered any evidence that Jake posed a threat. In fact, all evidence points to you and your father orchestrating a campaign to ruin his life. So, Mr. Thompson, who exactly were you protecting?" Grant hesitated, his facade slipping. I was protecting my family's name. Jake, he was reckless. He couldn't be trusted. Couldn't be trusted to play poker or to raise his daughters." Lisa's words hit like a hammer, and Grant visibly flinched. "Because it seems the only thing Jake ever did was succeed in a career you couldn't control. Your actions, on the other hand, speak of jealousy and manipulation, not protection." Grant's face twisted, and I saw the raw anger boiling beneath his calm exterior. "You don't understand. This is about family values, about preserving what we built." Lisa leaned forward, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. "Or is it about control, Mr. Thompson? Control over a brother who succeeded without your approval? Control over two young girls who had a right to know their father?" Grant's silence spoke volumes. The courtroom was tense, everyone riveted by the confrontation. The truth was undeniable now, a searing light on the darkness my family had kept hidden. That evening, Emma and Ivy came to me with a quiet determination. They'd spent hours reading through the court transcripts, unraveling the threads of deceit that had controlled their lives. "We're done with them, Dad," Emma said, her voice trembling with emotion. "They've lied to us our whole lives. We want to be with you, away from all this." I wrapped them in a hug, feeling a mix of relief and heartbreak. The price of truth had been steep, but it had brought us together. Yet I knew the war was not over. Richard and Grant wouldn't let us go without a fight, and I feared what they might do to regain control. That fear was realized sooner than I expected. The next day, I found a threatening note slipped under my door, a veiled warning that if I didn't drop the case, I'd face consequences. I knew immediately it was from Richard. His desperation had turned dangerous, and I realized he was willing to go to any length to keep his grip on the family. But this time, I wouldn't back down. I was ready to fight until the end, whatever the cost. The court proceedings took a dark turn as Richard's threats intensified. Lisa arranged for added security, but the tension was palpable. Every day, we entered the courtroom knowing Richard and Grant would stop at nothing to regain control. The pressure weighed heavily on Emma and Ivy, who had become key witnesses against their own family. One evening, as we reviewed the case, Lisa looked at me, her eyes somber. "Jake, you have to be prepared. This could get uglier. Richard's influence is far-reaching, and he won't go down without a fight." "I don't care," I replied, resolute. "I won't let him take my daughters from me again. They're my family, not his pawns." Lisa nodded, her determination mirroring my own. "Then let's finish this." The trial reached its climax when Richard himself took the stand. He was visibly rattled, the years of power slipping through his fingers. Lisa tore into him, exposing every manipulative tactic, every cruel decision he'd made to keep me out of my daughters' lives. Richard tried to maintain his composure, but Lisa's relentless questioning wore him down. She forced him to admit, piece by piece, the truth behind his actions, the fear of losing control, the jealousy of my success, the obsession with keeping the family legacy intact. In the end, Richard's mask shattered. He broke down, confessing the depth of his lies and manipulation. The judge, disgusted by the display, condemned him for his actions, and with that, the court was adjourned. As we left the courthouse, Emma and Ivy stood beside me, a newfound strength in their eyes. The battle was over, and we'd won. But the scars of our family's betrayal would linger. We were free, but at a price. The trial had brought us closer than ever, but it had also marked the end of our ties to Richard and Grant. We were no longer bound by their legacy of control. We were free to build our own family, one based on truth and love, not manipulation and lies. In the days that followed, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Emma and Ivy were by my side, and for the first time, we were a real family. I couldn't breathe when I saw the results. My mind refused to process what I was looking at, DNA test results that shattered my understanding of everything. The twins weren't mine. The blood of my brother, Grant, coursed through their veins, and the realization that Richard had not only stolen my life but had made my brother complicit in his deception hit me like a freight train. The betrayal was deeper than I could have imagined. I stared at the letter in my hands, the words on the page blurring as my anger boiled over. Grant, the man I had called my closest confidant, my partner, was the father of the twins. I was nothing more than a pawn in Richard's cruel game. The years I'd spent raising them, the sacrifices I had made, all of it was a lie. My brother had taken what was mine, and Richard had orchestrated it all, positioning himself as the puppet master of my life. I stormed out of the house, the weight of the discovery threatening to crush me. I needed answers, and I would make sure they came at any cost. The poker game that had once been my escape would now be the battlefield where I would fight not just for my daughters, but for everything I had lost. I reached out to Ivy and Emma, who were just as shocked by the news. Together, we began to piece together the web of lies Richard had spun. Every conversation we had from that point on was filled with bitterness and the need for revenge. We were no longer a family united by love, we were a coalition bound by vengeance. But it was Emma who finally connected the dots, linking the DNA test results to Richard's financial manipulation. "We're not just talking about family betrayal, Dad," Emma said, her voice cold and determined. "Richard built an empire on your back. The poker fund, everything you built, was a lie. And he made sure to erase you from it. He took your place, took your life." The words hit me harder than the betrayal itself. Richard had not only robbed me of my children, but he had systematically dismantled my legacy, erased me from the poker world, and left me with nothing but the wreckage of a life that never belonged to me. I felt the fire of revenge burn in my chest. Richard's empire wasn't just built on lies, it was built on my back. And now, I would burn it all down. It was time to take the fight to Richard. But we couldn't do it alone. We needed leverage, and Emma had found it. While Richard had been manipulating his financial dealings, he had left a trail, one that led to offshore accounts, secret investments, and shady deals. Emma's skills in digging through his financial records had paid off. The next few weeks were spent meticulously building a case, reaching out to former allies of Richard's who were now willing to testify against him. The most important piece of the puzzle, however, was the poker fund. The very thing Richard had used to control the industry and manipulate the players into his grasp. "I'm not just going to take back what's mine," I told Emma as we sat in our makeshift war room, littered with documents and evidence. "I'm going to ruin him. We're going to take his empire down, piece by piece." It was a brutal plan, but it was necessary. The truth, the absolute truth, would come out. And when it did, Richard's name would be dragged through the mud. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore, I was fighting for the future of the poker world, for the people he had betrayed, and for the dignity I had lost. The fight wasn't without its casualties. As we launched our attack, Richard fought back with all the resources at his disposal. Lawyers, private investigators, and mercenaries who had worked for him for years came out of the woodwork. Every day felt like a battle, every phone call, every email, every meeting, a war on multiple fronts. But I was prepared for this. I had learned from my time in the poker world that power could be defeated with strategy, patience, and a willingness to play dirty. And I was willing to do whatever it took. The legal battle was as fierce as anything I had faced in the game. Richard's lawyers threw everything at us, attempting to discredit us at every turn. They twisted the narrative, trying to paint me as a man driven by jealousy, a father who wasn't fit to raise his own children. But the truth, no matter how hard they fought, was on our side. The final blow came in the form of a public hearing, where the full extent of Richard's betrayal was laid bare for everyone to see. The poker fund was shown to be a front for laundering money, with Richard at the helm. Grant's involvement, once a secret, was now exposed. And with that revelation, my status as the rightful father of my daughters was reaffirmed. I stood in that courtroom, staring across at Richard as he realized the walls were closing in. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. And for the first time, I felt the sweet taste of justice. The legal victory didn't come without its toll. Richard was forced to step down from his influential positions, his empire crumbling under the weight of his deceit. But the truth had a way of unraveling everything, and now that it was out in the open, there was no going back. The family's powerful connections were fractured, and those who had once supported Richard turned against him. The fallout was as brutal as I had imagined. The pain of the truth, however, wasn't just confined to Richard. It echoed through every part of my life. Grant was no longer my brother, he was a traitor, a man who had destroyed my family for his own gain. Our relationship, if it could be called that, was over. The twins, my daughters, had to come to terms with the fact that their entire upbringing had been a lie. They were now adult women, caught in the web of a family they had never known. But through it all, Emma and Ivy remained my pillars of strength. Emma had become a force to be reckoned with, using her knowledge of the poker world and the financial connections we had to rebuild our family's reputation. Ivy, too, was learning to navigate the new reality, working to heal the wounds caused by Richard's betrayal. Despite everything that had happened, I could see a path forward. The legacy Richard had stolen from me wasn't gone, it was still alive in Emma, Ivy, and me. We had the chance to rebuild, to reclaim what was rightfully ours. And though the road would be long and the battles still raged on, I knew we would face it together. I sat in my office one evening, looking out at the city skyline, when Emma and Ivy walked in. They had been working tirelessly to restore the family name, and it was paying off. The new foundation we had created, one based on honesty, integrity, and hard work, was slowly gaining ground. "We've done it, Dad," Emma said, her voice steady and proud. "The fund is back under our control. We've won." I nodded, a mixture of relief and exhaustion washing over me. "It's only the beginning," I said. "There's still work to be done. But we're finally free." As I looked at my daughters, I knew that we had fought not just for justice, but for our future. The past would always haunt us, but we had the power to shape our own destiny. And as long as we stuck together, no one would be able to tear us apart again. The world was ours to reclaim. And with the truth finally out, we would stop at nothing to make sure it stayed that way. The world seemed different after the dust settled. The battle had been fierce, and while I had reclaimed my legacy, my daughters, and my place in the poker world, the cost was something I would never forget. Richard's empire had crumbled, but so had the family bonds I once took for granted. It was a strange thing, this victory, a hollow echo that reverberated in the quiet of my empty house. The truth had set me free, but it also left scars that would never fade. I spent weeks alone, trying to process everything. The constant legal battles, the revelations about Grant's betrayal, the emotional wreckage of everything I thought I knew, all of it had taken its toll. But through it all, one thing kept me going, my daughters. Ivy and Emma had become the women I always hoped they would be, strong, resilient, and unyielding in the face of everything their family had put them through. They had been through hell, yet they stood beside me when it mattered most. It was time to rebuild, not just the poker fund, but the fractured pieces of our family. One evening, I received a call from Ivy. "Dad, we've been thinking," she said, her voice filled with a quiet urgency. "There's something we need to do, together. We can't let Richard and Grant define who we are. I understood immediately. We had all been living in the shadow of their lies for too long. It was time to step into the light, to reclaim not just the wealth and power they had stolen from us, but our dignity, our sense of self. The past was gone, but the future was ours to shape. I met with Ivy and Emma the next morning at our newly established headquarters, a place we had created from the ashes of the poker empire Richard once controlled. We weren't just rebuilding, it was a complete rebranding, a reinvention of who we were as a family. We focused on ethics, transparency, and the integrity that had been so lacking in our past dealings. We can't just take back what's ours, I said, standing before them. We need to create something new. We need to be a force for change, a reminder that integrity, even in a world of deceit, is what matters most. Emma nodded, her eyes fierce with determination. We'll build something they'll never be able to take away. Something that will last. It was more than just business. It was a statement, a defiance against everything Richard and Grant had done. And we were ready to make it. But even as we worked to rebuild, the past continued to haunt us. Grant had tried to make amends, but it was too late. The bridge between us had been burned beyond repair. He couldn't undo the years of lies, the betrayal of not just his brother, but of his nieces and the life we had once shared. In a final attempt to confront him, I met Grant in a dimly lit bar, the kind of place we used to frequent when everything felt simpler. He looked older now, the weight of his actions written on his face. I didn't want this, he said, his voice cracking as he met my gaze. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I was wrong. I don't know who you are anymore, I said coldly. You're no longer my brother, Grant. And you never will be again. The confrontation was cathartic, in a way. There was nothing left to say. My brother was gone, replaced by a stranger who had made his choices. And those choices had cost him everything. As the months passed, things began to settle. The family business, what was left of it, grew stronger, and Ivy and Emma began taking on more responsibility. The poker world, though forever changed by Richard's fall from grace, slowly started to rebuild its reputation. We weren't just fighting for money anymore, we were fighting for redemption. But the greatest victory, the one that mattered most, was in how we healed as a family. Ivy and Emma didn't just become my daughters again, they became my allies. We were no longer tied to the legacy of Richard and Grant. We were building something new, something stronger than the lies that had once kept us divided. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place one evening when Ivy and Emma walked into my office with smiles on their faces, carrying the final documents that confirmed the family business had been fully restored. Our names were once again at the forefront of the poker world, not as the victims of Richard's schemes, but as a symbol of strength and resilience. We did it, Dad, Emma said, her voice thick with emotion. We're back. I looked at them, my heart swelling with pride. No, we're more than that, I replied. We're a family again. The truth had cost me everything, but in the end, it gave me something even more valuable, my daughters, my legacy, and the chance to rebuild what had been broken. The road to redemption wasn't easy, but it was worth every battle, every sacrifice. And as I stood there with my daughters, looking out at the horizon, I knew one thing for certain, we had won. And nothing, not even the bloodshed, the lies, or the betrayals, could take that from us.